everyone, it's Tony with Hidden Light Photography. And over the last few months, I've received a number of questions regarding Nina's advanced sequencer. And the trend seems to be either my sequence isn't quite performing the way I expect it to, or I can't find what I'm looking for. And that's okay. There's a lot going on in there. And in today's video, we're going to be going over kind of a different way to look at it to try to tie the pieces together. So if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button. I don't want you to miss out on any useful information. Now let's jump into Nina and try to make it make sense. Nina's advanced sequencer is a powerful tool that allows us to retain full control and precision over our imaging sequence. But let's face it, it can be a little bit intimidating, and it doesn't have to be. Now, I do have a few videos going over how to build an imaging sequence within the advanced sequencer, but that's not what today's video is about. Today's video is about going over the little intricacies that go along with using the advanced sequencer to try to make it less overwhelming to use. To get started, in Nina, if we go to Sequencer, Advanced Sequencer, we're met with the Advanced Sequencer's interface. Off to the right, we have a bunch of instructions here. And then we're met with a blank workspace. And this is kind of where the intimidation can start sparking. And I want to try to help make this easier. In fact, I want you to ignore all of these instructions on the right. I'm going to show you a better way to think about them. In fact, we're only going to be working with two. More specifically, under instruction set at the top, we're going to be working with parallel instruction set and sequential instruction set. Now in the middle, we have our workspace, and that contains sequence start area, sequence target area, and sequence end area. Now let's jump back over to instruction set. We have two types, parallel instruction set and sequential instruction set. But what do they do? Parallel instruction set, marked by the single dot at the top and then the three dots alongside each other at the bottom, is called a parallel instruction set. And what that does is it tells your instructions to run at the exact same time simultaneously. On the flip side, sequential instruction set, marked by the three vertical dots, tells your instructions to run one after another. The first one must complete before the second one can begin. So when is it appropriate to use these? Let's take a basic sequence. We want to salute to the target, run autofocus, and take a capture. If we were to use parallel instruction set, that would then slew, run autofocus, and capture our image all at the same time. Obviously, we don't want to do that. That's where sequential instruction set comes in. Sequential instruction set would then take that same sequence and it would slew to our target. Once it's done slewing, it'll run autofocus. Once autofocus is done running, it'll capture our image. So when is it appropriate to use parallel instruction set? Let's take sequence start area. Our sequence start might consist of something like cool our camera and unpark our scope. One will not affect the other. So in that case, it is perfectly acceptable to run those at the same time. Now on the flip side, at sequence end, we might have something like warm our camera and park our scope. Again, one does not affect the other, so we can warm our camera and park our scope at the exact same time. So we can go ahead and use parallel instruction set to run those. Now during our main body, obviously we don't want to slew, autofocus, and capture all at the same time, so we're going to use sequential instruction set. And that goes in sequence target area. Sequence target area is the heart of our sequence. This is where meridian flip, autofocus, image capture, all of that comes into play. And since we don't want to run those all at the same time, we're going to use sequential instruction set. In fact, let's go ahead and grab it and move it onto the workspace under Sequence Target Area. So now that we understand what parallel instruction set does and what sequential instruction set does, what are triggers, loop conditions, and instructions? This is where all of these instructions come into play. This is where I'm going to make it easier to find. Let's start at the bottom. Instructions. Think of instructions as items that control or are part of the sequence. When you're thinking about what you want your setup to do, if it controls or is part of the sequence, you're more than likely to find it under instructions. Loop conditions is a way to tell Nina to stop your sequence once a certain criteria is met. And finally, triggers are items that engage or trigger once certain criteria is met during a live sequence. So if you're trying to find out where something is that engages or triggers during a live sequence once certain criteria is met, you're more than likely to find it under triggers. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Let's take slewing. Before we capture an image, we want to slew to our target. There's no criteria that needs to be met. It is something that controls the sequence or is part of the sequence itself. So we're more than likely to find it under instructions. If we go to the plus sign under instructions and we go to instructions, we're met with different equipment types. So what is slewing? Slewing has to do with our mount. So we're going to find that under telescope. And here we have slew and center, slew, center, and rotate. So now, what's another example? After we slew, we want to go ahead and actually capture our image. So under instructions, we go to the plus sign, instructions, and we go to camera. Now, again, capturing an image isn't something where criteria has to be met. That's just part of the sequence, which is why it's going to be under instructions. And here we can find smart exposure, take many exposures, and we can add that to our sequence. Now, I go over these more in depth in the videos where I build a sequence, and I'll have those linked to the description of this video here. So make sure to check those out. I go over again in more depth what each of these does. Now, before we capture an image, we also may want to autofocus. So autofocus is part of the sequence. It's not something that certain criteria has to be met, or at least in the sense of we just want to autofocus. So we want to slew, we want to make sure that we're in focus, so we want to autofocus and then we can capture. Well, we're going to find that under instructions. Again, if we go to focuser, here we have run autofocus. Now, run autofocus, again, in this sense, is it is an item that is part of the sequence. There is no criteria that needs to be met. Now, one more thing that I want to go over, and I did it in this order on purpose. Sequential instruction set is one instruction after another. So what this is going to state is that we're going to slew, center, and rotate. We're going to take exposures, and then we're going to autofocus. Obviously, we want to run autofocus before we capture our images. So we can grab this and drag it to where we need it. Everything needs to be in the order that you're expecting it to be in, otherwise your sequence may not behave the way you're expecting. So in other words, when you're building your sequence, make sure that the instructions are in the order that you want them to be in. Now for loop conditions, this is a way to tell Nina to stop imaging once certain criteria is met. So what would be an example of that? Let's say that you have enough exposures in here to last several nights. You don't have to try to figure out the math of How many exposures can I take in a night, considering dithering, autofocus runs, or even just limit your exposures to last a night? You can have as many exposures in here as you need. That's where loop conditions comes in. You can tell Nina, I want you to stop imaging and move on to the next item at this point in time that I have set. So under loop conditions, if we go to the plus sign, we can see the different criteria that we can set. Let's consider my scenario. I have trees in the west, and those trees only allow me to image until my target is at about 30 degrees altitude. Once the target drops below 30 degrees, I start imaging the trees, and I don't really want to do that. So what I would do is loop until altitude below, and then I would set 30 degrees. Once the target gets below 30 degrees, Nina's going to go ahead and stop imaging. But you don't have to use altitude. You can loop until time, and you can set a specific time that you want Nina to stop looping. Or you can stop looping at astronomical dawn. You can stop looping at nautical dawn. There are so many ways that you can set up your sequence, and you don't have to do the math or think too much into it. That's the beautiful part about the advanced sequencer. Now for triggers, again, triggers are items that engage or trigger once certain criteria is met during a live sequence. So what are some items that you can think of? Let's take autofocus. Now, autofocus in the sense over here under instructions is a direct command. It is a direct part of your sequence. But what if we want to autofocus once HFR increases 10%? That HFR increase 10% now becomes a criteria that's met during a live sequence. So we can find that under triggers. Here we have autofocus after HFR increase. We're adding that 10% increase criteria, which makes it now a trigger. So as Nina's running your sequence, it is watching the HFR, and once the HFR increases 10%, Nina's going to run autofocus. What's another trigger that you can think of? How about meridian flip? Meridian flip is something that engages or triggers during a live sequence once criteria is met. That criteria is going to be how you have meridian flip set up in Nina. So once your telescope crosses meridian, it's going to trigger meridian flip. If we go to the plus sign, here we have meridian flip. So when you're setting up your sequence and you think about it, anything that controls or is part of the sequence, you're more than likely to find it under instructions. And anything that engages or triggers after criteria is met during a live sequence, you're more than likely to find under triggers. And that is my way of cleaning up this intimidating list. So let's go ahead and clean this up really quick. And there's one more quick thing that I wanted to go over. I've been asked a few times about having Nina wait to image. So if we wanted to set the advanced sequencer to wait until it starts the sequence, where would we find that? Now keep in mind, it's not during a live sequence. It's something that controls the sequence. So we're going to find that under instructions. If we go to instructions and then we go to utility, because it doesn't have anything to do with this equipment here, we go to utility, we have our wait commands. Wait for our target to be at a certain altitude, wait for a certain time, so on and so forth. So we can also set that up. Again, keep in mind, we want to make sure that we place this in the correct spot. And that correct spot would either be at the very beginning of your sequence, at the very top of your instructions, or I would probably put it in the sequence start area. Now, another thing to consider here is containers. Containers are important to understand because that can heavily determine how your sequence behaves. So what is a container? This box that contains instructions, triggers, and loop conditions, this entire box is considered a container. So you have two different types of containers. You have a parent container and you have a nested container. So what are those? Let's go ahead and minimize this. Let's grab another sequential instruction set and let's drop it in. Here we have two separate containers. We can see that the containers are independent of each other. If we maximize them, we can see that these two containers are separated from each other. They're at the same indentation level from the left side of the workspace, and they contain their own triggers, loop conditions, and instructions. These are called parent containers. If we were to grab this container at the bottom and move it within the original container, we now have parent container and we have nested container. We can see now that this parent container now encases the nested container. The nested container is within the parent container. So what are the benefits of a nested container? Let's go ahead and minimize our nested container really quick. And I want to give you a quick visual. Let's go to instructions and let's just throw something in there. Let's say slew center rotate. I'm going to move that up to the top. And if you take a look at slew center rotate and you take a look at our nested container, they're indented the same as each other. They are one on top of another. This nested container is part of the instruction set of our parent container. So let's visualize it this way. Let's do M31. Let's do LRGB. What we just did here is we made a main container, a parent container for M31, and now we have our LRGB instruction set where we can house, let's just do this really quick, all of our LRGB instructions. We can do all of our LRGB. Let's go ahead and duplicate this a few times. We have luminance, we have red, we have green, and we have blue. So we can set up our LRGB image capture sequence as a nested container or instruction set within M31. So we can organize it. Now, another thing to consider with nested containers, let's say we were to set under the M31 parent container, we go to triggers and we do meridian flip. And then we do our autofocus routine. So HFR increase after, let's say, 10%. The triggers within our M31 parent container are global to the instructions within the M31 parent container. So in other words, the meridian flip and our autofocus triggers will also be considered with our LRGB imaging container. So whatever you have nested within a parent container will also follow the same triggers as the parent container. The same goes for loop conditions. So we can set our loop condition, let's just say for altitude below. Our LRGB instruction set here, or our nested container, will also be controlled by our loop conditions. So it's just another way to go ahead and organize your instruction set or your imaging sequence. Now again, I go over building an actual sequence in the other videos, which I'll have linked in the description of this video here. But it's important to know and understand that when you have a nested container, one, it carries on the triggers and loop conditions of the parent container, but it also affects how your sequence runs. So now, let's just say, for example, let's grab our LRGB and let's drag it outside. I may have to throw it up on the top temporarily. I don't know why it behaves like that. But either way, let's say that we were to set this up, right? And we have it set up like this. So M31, we have our meridian flip trigger. We have our HFR increase autofocus trigger. We have our loop conditions, our slew center rotate. What would happen in this scenario if we were to accidentally house our LRGB outside of our M31 container? Both of these containers are now separated. So LRGB is no longer an instruction within M31. So we're going to keep on imaging and imaging and imaging. Our loop conditions are not going to affect LRGB. Neither is meridian flip or even autofocus. So in other words, meridian flip is not going to happen. Autofocus is not going to happen. And loop conditions is not going to happen because we accidentally housed our LRGB container outside of M31. Both of these are now parent containers. So this setup could cause a tripod collision if you flip meridian, or I should say pass meridian, and you never flip it because you don't have the meridian flip trigger. So just food for thought, when you're building your sequence, you want to make sure that you're considering parent container versus nested container. You want to make sure that if you mean to have a container nested within a parent container, you have that set up correctly. Now, another advantage of nested containers, let's think of it like this. Let's say we have M31, and let's say that we need M31 as a mosaic. Well, we have panel 1 that we can set up. We have panel 2 that we can set up, so on and so forth. And we can keep them within the same instruction set as our parent container, just to keep things organized. And then you don't have to set up so many triggers or loop conditions because you can have it all set up within the parent container to control your nested containers. Now, another piece that you can do within the advanced sequencer is, let's say that you have LRGB, and then let's say that you have a narrowband setup. And let's say that the conditions out are better for narrowband. You still have some LRGB captures that you need to finish for the integration set, but the conditions are better for narrowband. You can easily skip over LRGB for that night or several nights by simply clicking the power button. Clicking the power button then skips the nested container that you have here, and once it's done following your instructions such as slew center and rotate, it's just going to go ahead and image narrowband. You can do the same thing for narrowband or whatever containers that you have in here that you want to skip over. So the power button turns the container on or off. Now let's go ahead and I'm just going to name this example. Let's say you have a sequence set up and you want to make it into a template. you really like how it runs, and you don't want to have to keep building it over and over again. Simply go ahead and click the Save button, and it'll save it to templates. You can find that template over on the right side, go to Templates, and you have your template. Now, let's say that you don't want that template anymore, or you made a mistake, you just want to get rid of it. Grab your template, drag it to the trash can, click OK, and it's gone. Now, setting up multiple targets. You can have your template here. Let's call this one M51. And you want to image M51 until it's out of sight. So we're going to image this until it drops below 30 degrees. We can go ahead and I'm just going to, for example's sake, just clone that. And then we can go ahead over to M31. So now when we look at this, we have our sequence for M51. As soon as M51 is done, Nina will go ahead and slew over to M31. Now, keep in mind, it's important to understand this. The way I have this sequence set up here, it's not going to slew anywhere. I don't have anything set. In my sequence building video, I go over exactly how to build a sequence that takes you to specific targets. This video here is just going over the intricacies and different ways to use Advanced Sequencer, so make sure to keep that in mind. And when looking at this, it comes back to parent container, such as M51 here, and M31, as well as nested container. And I think that might be one of the hardest parts to understand in the Advanced Sequencer is parent container versus nested container, but all that they are is just a way to organize. You can set up different filters, you can set up different panels in a mosaic, but keeping your panels of a mosaic or filters such as LRGB imaging and narrowband imaging within a parent container just organizes the sequence and makes it a little bit easier to understand. And again, when you're dealing with parent and nested containers, make sure that they are in the positions that you want them to be in. Otherwise, your sequence can behave quite differently than what you're expecting. And you'll know when they're in the right spot because, as you can see, these instructions, slew, center, rotate, and then the nested container LRGB and narrowband all fall in line with each other. So these nested containers become part of the instruction set of M51 in this particular example. So I hope you found this video useful, and if you did and want to help support the channel, check out that join button and consider joining a Hidden Light Photography membership. There's lots of perks in it for you, and your support helps me bring you more content. Another way you can help support the channel is checking out my High Point Scientific affiliate link if you're in the market for some new gear. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and the support helps me keep the channel growing. Also, do me a favor. That channel icon that popped up, hit that channel icon and subscribe. I don't want you to miss out on any valuable information. Drop a comment in the comment section. Have you used Nina's Advanced Sequencer yet? If you're new to it, what did you find to be overwhelming, and did you find this video useful? And then, check out that next video. Until the next time, clear skies.